today. I'm
Oh.
in right now.
Wow.
Well, there you go. 40. Yeah. You've been playing 4D chess while I've been playing 1D checkers.
The people playing 4D chess are in a different call.
Yeah, I can't be part of that. We got invaded by chess club. I can't compete.
Yeah, it was a lot more than I expected, Alumni, because I have a friend who is in chess club, and I said, hey, in the event that we might get somebody who's actually good at chess, could we have somebody that's of equal skill? Because not many people in the fraternity are that good. So I said, hey, if you could advertise this event to anyone who's interested, and I think like 6 or 7 people showed up today. So yeah, and like there's a lot more people not in that call right now who are also playing. They're just hanging out and playing chess.
Nice.
All right, so we'll just wait for. I'll send an email to Eric to remind him that this is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Actually, yeah. Steve, this has been a giant prank. This is your final dissertation for your game architecture class.
Dude, he just went straight from bachelor's to PhD. Dude, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's like
that's what I do.
I imagine it's like one of those stress streams where you like wake up. For me, I got a lot of high school stress streams like freshman year. It's like, oh crap, I missed the bus, or like, oh crap, I missed my psychology test. I'm like, I haven't taken psychology in 3 years.
Wakes up in cold sweat. Wait. Yeah, for me, I like have problems like actually eating before like tests and stuff, but usually like I've never had a nightmare from test anxiety.
Me, never.
All right, I just sent the email to Eric. Hopefully he responds. If not, we'll get started at 7:10, 7:15. So how have you guys been?
Is the grace period from start of class to when the teacher is allowed to start after they're a little late still like 7 minutes at RPI?
Well, I don't know. Like, yeah, if the professor is late by 15 minutes, we're legally allowed to leave.
Wait, I never heard of that. Like, I don't know. How did you know that?
It's a joke. It's not actually. That's not actually a thing.
Okay.
God, I kind of wish that would be hilarious. If Dr. Jackson is late for the introduction, for shaking our hands, going down into the approach, we are legally allowed to graduate from RPI right then and there.
Well, I do know in grad school in a student handbook, it's specified like if the teacher's not present or doesn't send some type of communications explaining when they're going to be there, if they're late, that you can leave class after 10. You can leave after 10 minutes. So
it does exist 15-minute rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just unofficial at this point. It basically, whenever a teacher doesn't show up, everybody just brings it up like immediately in any class.
Yeah.
I've literally heard it in like high school. Yeah.
Hey, did you guys hear about the pool on the 6th floor of Sage? No?
Well, you haven't been there yet?
Yeah, exactly. You get a hall pass to get to a secret red elevator in the back. Oh, actually, I do. This is more of a personal thing, but I have some good news. Earlier this morning, I got accepted into the UCLA Materials PhD program.
Awesome. Hey, nice.
Hey, nice, man.
Awesome. So I have a future.
Well, make sure you're fully funded. I know was it Cyrus was applying to a lot of grants his senior year to make sure he got full funding for Stanford. Well, that was years ago. But Cyrus Liu, I don't know if you guys know him.
Who?
It's Christos's little brother.
Yeah, my little Cyrus.
Ah, yeah. Mm.
I guess proportionally equally as old as us.
I was like, oh yeah, sure. As well as I know you guys.
Yeah.
Um, oh geez, now I have to remember how to spell Alex Bilka.
Wait, why do you need to know how to spell my name?
Just so it's not Boloka phone. Because I'm
I don't
recording.
know. That sounds pretty good to me.
I'm recording this right now. I'd like a little bit more formality.
All right, fair enough. Go for it.
Okay, you know what? Fine. Here, Alex, I'll do this for you. There we go. Is that how I spell your name?
Dude, I'm on my phone. I literally cannot see. I'll just trust it. Dude, nobody except for me will ever know it's misspelled. It doesn't matter.
All right, let me actually look it up. There we go. I think that's probably right. All right, 7-Eleven. Shall we start? Oh. Okay. Yeah, I guess we'll just start now, and then when Eric hops in, we'll catch him up on whatever conversation we have at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull up my Word document. All right, so hello everybody. Thank you, Patrick, McAndrews, and Christos Constantinou. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry. All right. Can you briefly tell me, guys, what you who you guys are, what you've been doing?
Sure. I mean, I can start. I'm Patrick McAndrews. Currently, I am a construction project manager for the construction company out here in California. I live in Oakland and work in the Bay Area. I went to school for architecture, worked in the architecture field, actually the same field, same office as Christos for a couple of years there, and 5 years in total in architecture firms, then moved over to the owner side. I worked at WeWork under their development sector. You might have heard of WeWork as they imploded several times. And then more recently, so I'm on the move to construction side. And so that's kind of been my experience. I graduated with the architecture degree from RPI in 2012.
Yeah.
And Christos.
And I'm Christos Constantinou. I pronounce it, but I know everybody always messes it up. But anyway, so like Patrick, I also graduated architecture from RPI in 2012. So I've been working now for 8 years, almost, actually, because I also went to grad school to Columbia right after, and also studied architecture there as well. And I am now currently an architect designer at FX Collaborative. We're kind of a full service design firm in New York City. My main focus mostly has been residential, commercial, and mixed use high-rise buildings and design. So, yep.
All right, that's cool. And obviously you guys are also Delta Phi alumni from Lambda chapter here at RPI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming, guys. Today we're going to be talking about the impact COVID has had on the field of architecture in general. So one thing that obviously springs to mind is the change in like office spacing, or like how you guys would think about designing office spaces to accommodate, say, such like 6 feet social distancing and things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in on that really quick, because a lot of what I do that my firm focuses on, especially in particular, is the office design and the future of office buildings. And a lot of clients have been approaching us recently, asking us how they can reposition their buildings and their properties to be more attractive to tenants. in this post-pandemic world. So like this idea of integrating more technology into the building, such as like this whole touchless experience where as soon as you enter the building, like you don't have to interact with anything. You don't have to touch any doors, any kind of turnstiles. Like there's like sensors or like through the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, like it knows your phone, it knows you're here. So the turnstiles open, you go to the elevator, like it knows that you're there and it knows what floor you need to go to. So you never even have to touch the elevator button. And it extends even further, this whole idea of like the touchless technology into like bathrooms and stuff, like through hand dryers, so it can be completely touchless, flush valves, sinks, all completely touchless. So that's kind of the new wave that we've been noticing, or at least what our clients have been asking for when it comes to commercial space and office buildings. So I don't know if Patrick, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so my experience kind of similar to Christos's on that front. We're looking at, so I worked at WeWork doing co-working spaces. So that's either renting offices by the month or renting desks by the month, which requires, their business model is kind of really associated with high density. The usual metric is trying to get 50 square feet per person. Oh, and we got Eric here.
Hey,
I'm here. Sorry.
so glad you could come, Eric. So Patrick and Christos gave a brief introduction of themselves. Could you introduce yourself? What you've done, where you've been working.
Sure. Yeah. So, hello, everybody. Eric Haggstrom. I'm a senior project architect right now at JCJ. I'm working on Prince George's Community College, which is about a $90 to $100 million community college project outside of DC. In a past life, I spent a number of years at Shepley Bulfinch doing a variety of higher education projects for folks like Harvard and Duke and Cornell. And then in between, I was very briefly doing middle schools, which was actually a lot of fun, but it was just before the pandemic. So, and I'm actually doing another middle school now here in Tingsboro, which is pretty exciting because everything has changed now for schools.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say a couple of years ago. This is not at all related to COVID. This is just a personal tangent. I want to say it's a couple of years ago. My school district, we wanted to build a new middle school to accommodate the growing number of students, but in some boneheaded move, they got the numbers wrong, and so we just still have a too small middle school that cannot hold the number of incoming students.
Yeah,
So,
Mass has got a pretty good system.
Yeah. Is that boneheaded or is that just a misconception? I think that happens usually, especially in city schools where they plan for the kids they know that they have. And by the time the construction ends, that's, 20% too few students that they're accommodating.
Right. It's always a hard debate because you have 1,000 students and you're going to have 1,200, but you don't have 1,200 today. And you have to convince a 93-year-old guy at a town hall meeting that you will have 200 more kids by the time this project is done. And he should pay more taxes for it.
oh well. Well, those logistics of, architecture and planning to build buildings aside, we were just talking about the impact of the impact COVID has had on architecture, on planning to build buildings. Yeah, Christos and Patrick were talking about the new consideration for touchless technology or touchless interaction to go in between hallways or open doors and things in elevators. Patrick, do you have more thoughts to say?
Yeah, so I was talking about Christos was picking up on all the different touchless elements, and I was just pointing out one of the big considerations for office specifically was density, and employers or people renting are always want to figure out how many more people they can pack in, so which is a very unique situation now, considering you're basically, no matter what you're doing, you're at best 25% capacity. And so I used to work at WeWork, and that kind of the consideration there for profitability was trying to cram in so that the density was about one person for every 50 square feet, which is basically about the 6-foot bubble on an entire floor plate. So not very viable. And I think it's going to be a big consideration moving forward. But even just, I think in like clients that are, doing the traditional leases, 15, 20-year leases for their companies, the big consideration that I'm seeing on the construction side is trying to understand whether they need to reduce the amount of space they have right now or add more space. And I think the big question there is, you're at 25% capacity. Do you use the space you have to bring in 25% of the office? Do you increase the size of the office to increase the number of people you can have? Or do you shrink the size of the office and pare down because you know that most of your workers are going to go down? And I think there's a lot of flexibility there, and I don't think we've really landed on what we're going to be doing. You see the Googles of the world saying like they're going to allow, I think Salesforce just announced it as well, that they're announcing like a permanent stay-at-home policy or work from home policy, and that's how is that going to affect not only the building but also the urban environment, like every major city.
Like very early on, JCJ has offices all over the country, and one of them is in New York City, and the lease came up, and we were like, there's no reason to pay for Manhattan real estate prices for an office, a satellite office of like 8 or 9 architects who could just as easily work from their homes and get together at a coffee shop when we're in a pandemic. So we're probably never going to buy a physical space for New York City anymore because it's effective to work flexibly like this. So, that makes us think really hard about where we actually have a physical location, and where we don't.
Because I was also thinking about that. I had a internship at a Dutch company last year, and a lot of my colleagues, we were all we weren't business critical, but we had to be on our research campus because we required the lab spaces. So that's one thing that like is obviously not going to be changed after the pandemic. But there were also a lot of other people who say they were in like HR or finance or something where they work just as effectively back home, maybe an extra lag time due to emails. But yeah, so has there been, despite it only been a year, have you guys seen any change in demands for like for new buildings? Any changes to it's like fewer clients asking for, or clients asking for fewer buildings?
Depends on the market sector. We're spread out across a couple of different market sectors, and one of those is gaming. So JCJ does all the Native American casinos across the United States, and that was a big hit when all of those projects immediately went on hold. We were doing a couple of casinos in Las Vegas. That's a lot of revenue, keeps a lot of architects at their desk. But then again, education is actually moving ahead faster than ever. I feel like every facilities department is sitting around going, there are no students in my building. That never happens. So they're all trying to fix or build their new schools as fast as they can to adapt to the pandemic. And everyone else is somewhere in between. Healthcare is doing really well. Home sales are okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question. Like, you can bring it up, just things being empty. I know many states have actually looked at this as an opportunity to do really huge improvements on their infrastructure, roads, bridges, because they're not used as often these days. And so instead of, in the middle of rush hour, 2 years ago, having to close a lane, they can close, all but one lane and not really affect traffic and do these huge huge improvements. And I think that definitely exists for most areas.
Also, what's interesting, compared to the last recession, the 2008-2009, which was a doozy, that one came with just a credit crunch. All the money for lending dried up. All the money's still there in this pandemic. It's just no one's using the spaces and buying stuff. So there's pent up need to build buildings coming. Like we can feel as soon as the casinos started opening, even with like 1 out of every 8 tables, they started renovating restaurants and things again. You know, they want to get the work going again.
Yeah, and I think it depends on how like landlords respond to things. I'm seeing reports in New York how a lot of like private landlords or, you know, one-off buildings, they're losing a lot of tenants, but the moment they drop their, this is like first floor like restaurants with like, you know, multi-use kind of buildings, the moment they put the unit back on the market at a much reduced rent, they're getting bites left and right. So I think the restaurant business is kind of seen a little bit of a boon because the upstart costs are not so heavy right now, just because they don't have the huge expenses that to buy tables, chairs. The considerations for moving from like a food truck to a physical space are actually lower right now because they can lock in rents at a lower price right now with a decent lease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely felt that during, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone panicked, say, okay, we don't know what's going to happen within the next couple weeks, let alone the next couple months. So let's just reduce the numbers, you know, of people like moving around. So obviously, office spaces have completely cleared out. The you know, everything's emptier now. And my first thought looking at all that was, this is a really cool opportunity for, you know, like, you know, potholes to get fixed, for bridges with unsolid foundations to like get that extra support.
Yeah. Every client you're ever going to work for has a list called their deferred maintenance list. That's their things we haven't had the time and money to fix, but we know are broken list. And now they're all having a field day fixing all of those things.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of, one project I have is a private school with dorms in Marin County. So very wealthy area. Their deferred maintenance list is very long, and it's turning into a huge contract change orders that are giving us, we're just eating up all the work.
Yeah. Better to be busy than bored.
God, yeah, tell me about that. But yeah,
there's also sort of new work because of the pandemic, right? There's been the need to change some spaces like schools. We worked with a couple of different schools. I think it was Princeton and Tufts. We actually went in and installed more wireless routers. If there's a certain number of wireless routers in a building, like on a school campus, for instance, because you as a student on the campus, your phone, whenever it picks up wireless, they're allowed to track your location. If they can get you on 3 wireless access points, they can triangulate you to within like 1.5 feet of where you are. So they set up the colleges to track and automatically send alerts to facilities if 6 or more students show up within a certain radius. So they can send that immediately to the public safety. They can tell them where on campus it is, and they can tell them the names of all the students.
Jesus, that's a little terrifying.
It's
Yeah,
a little bit, but
too
it, it keeps people safe.
Yeah, but I mean, it keeps people safe, but like this infrastructure is now just going to be there in the future. I mean, you know, it comes down to the school not to abuse their power, but like,
Right.
you know, the implications of it are still unsettling, especially me as a student who likes my relative freedom and anonymity, that I don't like the idea that, you know, as I'm walking around, people know where I am.
You have less anonymity than you think and freedom as a student than you think. They monitor an enormous amount of the data that goes through their network and things. It's all it's all anonymized data, so they're not looking at you.
They just know it exists.
They are looking at the group of students and trying to keep them safe. And if something happens on campus, they can use cell phone data and things like that to say, okay, well, who was there at this time? You know, it's not just he said, she said anymore. It's like, well, you were both there. I have proof of that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
I mean, mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with like, you're thinking about like invasion of privacy, but then there's like invasion of public, like of your personal space. I've been thinking about that a lot more recently, is like definitely working from home, like my hours of work, so you like kind of end up feeling a little guilty that like you roll out of bed a little later, but you kind of sit next to your computer and check your emails a little bit earlier than usual. And so the 8-hour day slowly goes to a 10-hour day. And if you had a 10-hour day, that slowly goes to 12 hours. And you're definitely, and most of us are on salary, not by the hour. So the employers are kind of actually eking out a little bit more out of you than they would have if you were going to the office.
Yes, we have been talking internally in our
Very
office
true.
about that people have been more productive during the pandemic, so even with not even Zoom, we're actually more productive individually. And then Zoom and all of this should make us worse. So we must be a lot more productive. And they're like, you shouldn't be. The only way you could be doing that is you're working too many hours. You should be at like 80%, not 110%. Spend time with your family, go home, take your vacation and sick time. You know, it's hard, especially in this industry, to turn the cell phone off. Once the contractor has your cell phone number,
It's done.
it's done.
I was gonna say that quickly. That was a joke that my Chinese parents made to me about their friends back in China, in that like, you know, many their jobs require them to be on site, you know, 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day. Like they have to clock in 12 hours or, you know, something like that. And so they don't really get time to spend with their children and spouse. And so when they get back, it's like, oh boy, the divorce lawyers are going to have a field day. But sorry, Patrick, you were about to say something?
Oh no, the moment has passed.
I'm curious to see, because I've only touched a couple of market sectors nationally, but what I'm starting to see from the pandemic is construction costs are actually going up, despite the fact that labor costs are going down, because people are desperate for work. We just can't get materials. You can't get controls out of Japan. You can't get sheet metal and steel out of China. You can't get aluminum out of Canada. Right? You just can't get stuff. Concrete, good old American concrete you can buy. But beyond that, it's getting hard out there.
Yeah, I think lead times are pretty much doubled across the board. So like even like, and that's always it's always a dramatic effect, because if you're like, think about like a window frame, you need to get the glass, you need to get the aluminum, you need to get you know, the gaskets and all of those. The moment like they have to, like our system of manufacturing is kind of like you get them just in time to put them together and manufacture and ship out the door. And the moment, you know, the aluminum comes, but then, you know, a week or two later, after too late, the glass comes, and the gases come too late, you're having time where these things are just sitting in the warehouse, taking up space and taking up cost. So everything's multiplying. Yeah, it's crazy. And the other thing I've been noticing is that even though like labor is getting a little bit cheaper, I mean, I'm in the Bay Area, so labor is still pretty expensive. There's a huge cost associated to the COVID restrictions, because normally when you could have 2 or 3 trades working at the same time, could have plumbers, could have electricians, could have you know, any number of things, could have, they can't be working in the same space. And so you have to stagger them out more. So where you could normally have like 5 trades working at the same time within a week, you have to have 1 or 2. And that's going to extend your timeline of your projects and the construction costs, and increase the number of mobilizations for each of these subcontractors, which is exponential.
Right, you have to run with smaller crews, which lengthens the schedule, and everything gets more expensive. It's the only time I've ever seen like an economic recession have prices go up for buildings. Normally when people aren't building buildings, it gets cheaper because they want to sell you steel and you're not buying it. But this is the only time where no one's buying it and it's more expensive.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so we've kind of looked at how this pandemic has affected just like our trends as civilization, as various countries. What let's turn back to the previous pandemic, the 1918 influenza. How from you guys, how have you seen that architecture has changed before 1918 and then after 1918?
Well, Roger, you remember living through this, right? So you can speak to it.
Yeah,
I got this gray hair. Honestly, you're right. I don't quite remember it.
It's interesting. It's hard. I feel like we in 1918, I don't know how much they could adapt, but today we're going to adapt buildings a lot after this. Working on a college during the pandemic that fell in the middle of design, the entire HVAC system of the building has been redesigned. The word laboratory grade, healthcare grade is showing up a whole lot more. Flyby, UVC flyby is a word you're going to hear a lot. So in your air handling units, your HVAC units, as the air passes through, there's a little UVC light in there. And that keeps Legionnaire's disease from growing. Just sits there and it just keeps little things from growing. But if you buy a really giant light, considering the air is moving by at 5 or 6 thousand cubic feet per minute, you can kill all the bacteria in it with a really, really big light. And that's called flyby sterilization. And so we're buying these huge units in all our air handlers so that air that comes into the building is all sterilized. You can do the same thing in vestibules. You can do flashes of UV light so people don't really feel it, but it'll disinfect your clothing and your body as you come in. It's disinfecting mats for people to walk on, touchless controls for everything now. Buildings will be different.
I think one of the big things to think about, is 100, pretty much almost exactly 100 years ago, we're looking at, you have the large windows you need to be thinking about, like what the way that the architecture was affected, back then, larger windows, bigger radiators, the intention of more light, more airflow. But I think overall, there's things like, hospital design changed a little bit. We went from like, not necessarily thinking about the materials to like using all white, thinking, okay, if we use white, we know that it's going to be clean when we clean it. Instead of having, some of these things like didn't necessarily actually improve cleanliness, but like rounding corners instead of having like angular corners to think about how to clean it easier. I think one of the big takeaways to think about is that we're going to be, in the next year, next 5 years, next 10 years, we're going to be adapting a lot of technologies and a lot of vernacular kind of processes and methods, and some of them are not going to work, and we're going to know a year from now we're like, wow, we did that, we thought that was going to work. So it's going to be like most things, going to be a huge process of trial and error.
Yeah, architecture has a slow edge learning curve. I mean, you have to build something a couple of times and let it stand for 10 years. So we got about 20 years before we go, oh, that was a terrible idea. And that's about how long it takes to realize you've done something wrong. 20, 25 years. If you're lucky, maybe 50 years. That takes a long time. So when something like this comes along that changes things so rapidly, architecture kind of goes, ugh, and loses its mind and tries everything all at once. And some of it's going to work. Some of it's going to be crazy. I'm worried that the new, like increasing air handlers, tighter buildings, things like that are actually going to lead to more energy consumption as soon as 5 years we're down the road. People are going to be using these buildings like they don't even remember what the pandemic was, but they'll be using way oversized equipment with huge energy loads.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is hopefully the exact opposite, that we like learn the lessons we've learned in the 90s and the 80s, where like sealing off your office building is probably a bad idea, and having operable windows, at least to some degree, is probably a good thing. And getting some more natural ventilation in. I think all these things we know are very good for, not only, our physical health, but our mental health. getting good solid light, indirect sunlight in deep into the interiors of our, especially office buildings where you're at most of the day. It's all going to be really important.
Yeah, and having access to outdoor space, I think, too, for office spaces. I think that's a huge trend, especially in New York. Like every new office building now has some kind of outdoor terrace or some balcony, like every other floor or something. Like it's all about getting outside. So that's going to continue, I feel like.
Yeah, so that was like a philosophical thing that I had in the back of my mind, just like in general in the past. It's when it comes to innovation, there are kind of like two pathways you can take. One where it's like brute force, put everything into technology, or put your faith into technology, or rely a little bit more on the natural approach. We've seen something that has worked for centuries before. We're still alive, so there must be some merit to it. So Eric, you mentioned that like right now we're using technology to like sterilize our air to make sure that the building is usable. For all three of you, do you think that there is some sort of like a more permanent natural solution to this going afterwards? You mentioned like having more open spaces. Is there anything else?
I think like everything in architecture, the buzzword of flexibility is going to be key here. I mean, we're gonna want to find systems that can be easily upscaled. So, air handlers that can have additional air filters put in them, but aren't necessarily oversized. And so the capacity is there when the crisis happens to change the system. We're talking about portable air filtration rather than changing the whole building, just having a little something there. Planning schools with more flexibility so that if we have to reduce classroom sizes again, we can break into smaller actual rooms rather than having these giant 850 to 1,000 square foot rooms for students that now you can only have 12 kids in. Or what do you do with gyms? What do you do with a gymnasium, all these locker rooms and bathrooms? All these schools have these big communal bathrooms, which become kind of a problem area. People are very uncomfortable going to the bathroom in these large group settings anymore. It's just, I think the interesting thing about whenever something like this happens, whenever there's some sort of bad thing that happens, is how people take the sort of the fear and the panic reaction to change everything about what we're doing. Change, and hold on to the core mission. So every school has some sort of collaborative community space now, and we design those. We want those. We want lots of people interacting and doing things like that, except not right now. But we don't want to throw that whole idea out and design schools so 10 years from now, they're like soulless and no one ever sees anyone. The same thing happened after Sandy Hook. There was a big talk in schools like, should all the schools be able to be locked at all times? Should they have bulletproof glass? Should they do these things? They worsen the student experience, but they make the students safer. So where's the delicate balance between going to school in a bunker and going into school in what would really be an unsafe environment? Where's the balance?
I think that's really interesting to think about. Like, I'm thinking about the two things I think about that I think I'm hoping there's like a good riddance moment is the open bathroom. And I want I've been fighting like all the jobs I've been out. I want single occupant restrooms all the way. You can have communal sinks, but single occupant restrooms with full partition heights. None of this like flimsy plastic separating you from someone else going to the bathroom where you can see their feet and see them moving around and hear them. Single occupancy restrooms, full ventilation in each of them. And the other one is like this debate within architecture between I'm sure when you have internships, you think about that, like the difference between open offices and closed offices in cubicles. And I think, while I've always kind of felt kind of more comfortable on the open office side, I think there is a go-between here. Like you're kind of already seeing like these plexiglass partitions and these adaptations of things where like you get the feeling of being with everybody else, but there is some division. I think those are two of the things that I'd be looking out for.
So really quickly, Dan has a question.
I didn't try to say I have a question, but I did have a question. So is that well, as Eric was talking, I suddenly realized that what do you guys think about MPAC as a building? Because you mentioned flexibility, and there's some ideas that you guys might think realize in 20 years later that it's not a good idea. So that's that kind of. But if you guys don't have much ideas, that's fine. I'm just curious if you guys have
The
any thoughts.
MPAC building could respond to COVID, or is my gut reaction to the MPAC building as a whole?
Yeah, as a whole, it's like kind of because to compare with, do you think some of the things are good, or because I think most students don't really like that building, and I don't get why we have it there or something.
So yeah, so I guess like what would your guys' gut reactions be? And then I have an addition to Dan's question that's more related to COVID.
So I think it's an interesting moment. So Christos and I were there for the construction. So when we started, I think Eric was his last year at RPI was when it did groundbreaking.
It did groundbreaking.
And so it finished, I think, on our second year, maybe our third year. Yeah. So we were there for the entire time of the construction. I think it's helpful for me to think about MPAC in terms of what it does for the university, and what it was intended to be was this big, glamorous, like PR thing. And when we were there, there was a push to get student organizations to do stuff in there, but the actual inevitable result of that was that not very many student organizations got to do stuff. Some of the schools got to do stuff. So the School of Architecture got its lecture series to put in there in 2011 to 2012 school year. But as a physical building, I think it's a manifestation of it's trying to be like this, putting RPI on a global scale. So it's using a global language of architecture, as represented by the architecture firm that did it, which is Grimshaw, designed it. That's a European, it's very much European architecture, very much responding to a international stage and trying to put RPI on an international stage. I think that's the way that I kind of see it. And it's like, so being a student there, you're going to see it there. You're going to go in a couple times. That's probably it. But when you see it in the brochures, that's probably like, that's the reason why it's there. When you talk about it and it's like,
photo, right?
What?
That one photo?
Yeah.
Yeah, one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It seems like the wrong scale for the campus, right? Like it's a big venue and presentation venue, like you were saying, Patrick, for a global stage. And it fits at like the campus of MIT that's in a major city, or anywhere in New York City.
Are you saying Albany is not a big city?
Yes, I'm saying Albany is not. It is not a city on a global scale where you're going to have enough speakers coming in to fill a building like that with the vibrancy of that I thought they were going for. So I don't know. I've been inside it. It's very pretty on the inside. I never got to use the building though.
I will personally comment as I'm a musician and I play with the RPI orchestra. We even as musicians who we're the intended users for the damn building, and even then we maybe get to use it 3 times, 2 dress rehearsals, and then the 3rd time is the concert. So it's like, okay, cool, I guess. I mean, we get to use it more than the rest of our campus, but at least for me, standing in there's a noticeable difference between like the gray noise outside of the wooden egg inside of MPAC, and then just standing there within the concert halls, like everything is just dead silence. You can't hear anything, which
well, outside the egg, it's a very reflective space. I mean, you're looking at glass, hard floors, the wood is hard. That's just, there's going to be a lot of reverb time in a space like that, right? So it's just not acoustically great outside the egg.
I forget, wasn't the ETFE in the roof, wasn't that supposed to be more expansive? So that the acoustic value might have been a little bit better before it was value engineered. Yeah, I think the way I always thought about it is that it's basically like your parents' and grandparents' formal dining room that you only get to use twice a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like it's such a nice
Sums it
building.
up
They never
really
let
well.
any students use it.
It's like, get that check mark off. So my COVID addendum to this is so obviously with the fact that we have to space ourselves out, that poses problems for like orchestras who want to use the space, and also audience members who want to have a in-person experience, for music in general. Well, I won't restrict it to classical, like other music in general. So like, has something like that come up in your guys's planning, like just for very specifically in music spaces? Have you guys thought about just making a bigger arena? It's a bit of an unfair question, but
Yeah, we've designed not full theaters, but small black boxes and little things like that, or acoustics. I mean, acoustically, it is very hard to have a truly what I'd call acoustically neutral space, because an acoustically neutral space will always be, any space that's great for classical music will be terrible for percussion. Any space that is for a rock band is not going to be great to have a conversation in. Like it's just, you need different acoustics for different kinds of spaces. And so that's why I feel like you always end up in like the smaller the theater, like the worse the sound, because they're trying to do everything. So they've made it sort of an amalgam of every different sound technique they could think of. Absorption, diffraction everywhere, just jammed on all the walls. But those are really fun spaces, and acoustics is a really it's a really important thing, because we're starting to understand more and more about how much even just small noise in the background can affect you throughout the day, like your physical health. Hearing loud noise, a jackhammer outside while you're at work for a year can take months off of your life. Like, these things are actually bad. They create stress for you. So acoustics are becoming more important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about like the theaters that we have, that like what theaters are we going to go back to? You'd have movie theaters, like concert venues. How are they going to be impacted? And I don't know that the size is really going to change. Like, I don't think, I would be surprised if the result of this is these developers of these stadiums think, okay, we got to build these things 2 times bigger. I think they're just going to suck it up for a couple of years, and we're going to go back to being really crammed. Thinking about like going to like a Broadway musical kind of situation where you're like, you have seats behind poles and things like that. But I think in the interim, are we like, what is the impact of acoustics values in concert venues when you have to be at 25%, at the 20% occupancy? I haven't worked with an acoustic engineer or acoustic architect in a while, but I know that they do kind of assign values for like how the space works with people in it versus people out of it. And the percentage of people in it is going to result in a different sound and different experience.
Yeah. I will admit, I miss plays and live music. Live theater and live music are experiences that you can't get on a screen. I mean, I'm sure if I spent a lot of money on speakers, maybe I could get somewhere close to making this little room I'm in feel like there was actually a band in here with me, but it would never be as good as actually going to see the band live. So I feel like that kind of thing is going to swing back, and it's going to swing back hard once people start feeling safe again. Everybody's going to go on tour. There's going to just be, every Broadway show is going to come back thundering and roaring back into life, and they're all going to want to be booked solid for months out, and they probably all will be.
And I think it's interesting, like I'm definitely feel like that's definitely true. And I think it's to some degree, not only is it like, the absence makes the heart grow fonder, but also all these like digital, like, oh, go see Hamilton on Disney Plus, like gives like the access to them online and through Zoom and through these experiences have made you even more thirsty for it. 'Cause it's like, it's just a taste of it, and like going to see it live is definitely going to be a thing.
Yeah, you can't watch Hamilton on your phone, and like it's just not a satisfying experience. You need to see it live. If
Yeah.
you can get tickets, you can always sell kidneys, teeth,
Maybe a liver.
liver. Yeah, I forget what tickets are up to. And I guess they're free now, right? No,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's other challenges. So one of the clients that I'm working with, this is the community college. We just actually got notified we're going to be a vaccine distribution center. So our construction site is now, so the campus doesn't have a location to pull enough power for the low temperature generators. So they're going to bring generators in, and the logical place to stick the generators is on the construction site, which happens to be next to the Center Performing Arts building, which is being converted into this massive, the theater's being converted into this massive storage location for vaccines and distribution. So now that's a new thing. We're in an active construction site, and we've been told we need to now adapt our construction site to something like 200,000 vaccines a month coming through. It's going to be tricky. Because not only do we have construction equipment moving around, like always, but we have contractors moving around, and there's the 6 feet rules, and we don't want to get people sick. And the contractors are moving around the site a lot, and they do get sick. We've had a couple of COVID cases on the construction site.
I mean, that
It sounds like a logistical nightmare.
certainly goes back to the flexibilities, though. I think the best example that I've seen of the distribution centers, vaccine distribution centers, are the hockey arenas, where they can literally where the space for the Zamboni goes back in, because it has to go outside. Just have like one line of cars coming in, go into the stadium, go in the line, you register, do thing A, do thing B, get your shot, go,
and then just drive right out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Then this was a conversation we also had yesterday. It was you guys were talking a lot about acoustics in relation to like today we're talking about acoustics in like a concert hall venue, or somewhere where acoustics are majorly important. But we also yesterday talked about acoustics in relation to like if you're in a lobby, for example, there's that plastic piece of plexiglass in front of you. It's hard to get information across. So like have you guys started thinking about how to like get around that so that you can still be heard despite face masks and just partitions everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it at a bank. You can hear the grocery teller at a bodega at 3 a.m. in New York City, and they're behind an inch of bulletproof glass. It can be done, but what's happening is a lot of people aren't seeking out architects and designers. They're going to Home Depot and they're buying an X-Acto knife and plexiglass because they need to get their employees back in whatever building it is, and they need to do it now. So unfortunately, a lot of these solutions are just ad hoc.
Okay. Yeah, so they're just literally here to address it for this period, and then they're going to be gone pretty quickly.
Right. The other thing that we're running into is trying to provide more visual cues. So with masks on, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to communicate with somebody who is hearing impaired through a glass screen. So hospitals, colleges, we are having to adapt. So one of the things is distributing iPads that messages can be typed on, having writing implements or things so people can write messages down. If you can't read somebody's lips or you can't hear them and you can't communicate, that's becoming a problem that we wouldn't face a year ago.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking about after we talked about that yesterday was even like like some things you wouldn't even think about as being a solution to a lot of those issues that already exist end up popping up. Like one of the things that I find commonly a problem is like exactly like Eric was talking about, like when they just plexiglass the crap out of the transaction counter at like a restaurant where you're picking up your food. Like all you really need to do is like show them a barcode that says, this is my food, scan it in, pay and leave. But you have to go through this whole thing where like sometimes like they might not even have like the newer registers where you can like swipe or tap your card from your side. You have to hand them your card still, and like all of that is like transaction points and touch points and like verbal cues that are needed, that none of that might be needed. You might just need to, you know, tap your phone right here and they're like, oh, okay, grab your food. There might not need to be a word spoken whatsoever.
Right. There's a little store near me that very early in the pandemic put up a big sheet of plexiglass like on the side of their counters right in front of them. And they went all the way down. But then like a couple of days of this, they realized the credit card reader was behind the thing. So they had to lean out every time. So they set up another chair, like a little stool, and they put the credit card reader. And then the guy at the counter ended up turning the cash register and sitting at the chair. And so there's an entire counter with a plexiglass shield that has no one sitting behind it. That lasted for about a week. See, this is architecture. You figure it out. You make a bunch of mistakes, and eventually you realize maybe locking the cashier in a plexiglass tube wasn't the best solution.
You just throw the entire kitchen sink at the wall and see if something sticks, and then realize that there's probably a better way to put them away.
Yeah.
Well, then let's move on to another topic that we also talked about. It's the use of materials. So, you know, in such as in a hospital setting, there's a lot more thinking being put into, okay, if we, you know, on one hand, we'll have improving like the air ventilation. On the other hand, we should also, you know, get rid of like dark surfaces, and maybe also consider having them be like antimicrobial, right?
Stainless steel, rounded corners. Anything that's, what is it, 302 stainless steel that is naturally antimicrobial. Rounded corners, welded seams on all of your flooring, integral base. It's all, the whole name of the game in a hospital is to prevent any kind of something from staying somewhere and growing into something else. Ceiling cavities are really big ones. So ceiling tiles can build up fungus, mold. You knock a ceiling tile out in a school or a building, you breathe in a little mold, you're fine. If you're having open heart surgery and a mold spore lands in your chest cavity, it can kill you. So you have to be really careful in hospital settings, you know, how air moves. And I feel like hospitals were sort of already prepared a little bit for COVID. The thing they were unprepared for is hospitals have slowly been becoming more and more inspired by hospitality. So you walk into the lobby and you have an experience that feels much like walking into a hotel. You feel comfortable, you know where to go. The materials are warm, they're comforting, there's woods, there's carpet. You should never have carpet in a hospital. It's just a terrible idea, but it's in all the lobbies, right? So the idea had always been, you know, if you're in really bad shape, you go to the ER, and that's set up more like an operating room. When you come into the hospital, you're in a warm, welcoming space that's supposed to make you feel better and more relaxed while you wait and you deal with the panic of whatever condition you or a loved one has. Like pediatric hospitals are crazy because kids don't understand why they don't feel good. Parents are terrified when their kids don't feel well. I mean, if you are a parent with a kid in a pediatric hospital, you are on like 13 for stress level. So the whole space is designed to just calm you down. Muted colors, soft furniture, beanbags, magazines you can touch, things to play with and distract you. All terrible ideas in COVID. Literally everything in that room is a terrible idea. That's things people touch together, absorptive surfaces, areas that are hard to clean. And we're having to rethink the whole way that we approach hospital lobbies.
You can no longer have the shag carpet or the leather chairs that you can just like bounce in.
You can get cleanable carpet. You can get antimicrobial cleanable carpet. You just have to, it comes in less shapes and sizes, and you just have to be more careful with how it's used. But
I think, I was just saying, like, I think we have to be careful about the lessons that we learn. If we learn let's exactly the same kind of situations, like we've got to be careful not to learn to put ourselves into a bubble and to be the person in that plexiglass thing. And I think we got to look at history, like some of the things like use of brass as an antimicrobial properties, like all over the place. Like I know Christos has mentioned that a client had requested brass as for all the hardware finishes on doors and everything, which is like, if you can afford it, that makes sense. Like I think of, like, I worked a lot when I was in firm setting on a lot of hospitality and restaurants, and the back of house, you have to get the follow, like you're talking about the kitchens and all the clean spaces are covered in, in plastic FRP, stainless steel, and tile that's, or like a resinous flooring that's heat welded so that there's no open seams. It's a little lifeless, and like, so you have to find that balance, right? Like there's always this, like, you see this right now with like the balance between healthcare and public health, where like there's things you should do, there's the things that people do, and there's the things that you think that you can get people to do to be safer. And I think that, like, we have to balance all these things, and I think that's one of the jobs that an architect, I think, ideally does very well.
I remember it. So at the very beginning, it was just after the Biogen conference stuff. Emily and I had been staying at home for a week, and that's when our son was born, early March, right before the lockdown was called. And the hospital was just starting to get ready. They hadn't had a COVID patient yet, but it was total chaos. They kept locking and unlocking doors. They were letting people in the lobby or turning people away. Halfway through, they were like, you can't go down this corridor, you got to go this new way. Like at the beginning, no one had any idea what they were doing. Now, we talk to hospital clients, and I mean, it's sort of unfortunate, but they have seen so much of this come through the hospital now that in a year, they've done 10 years worth of this repeated caring for people with COVID, and they have systems and they're prepared. It's a shame because every one of those means somebody has been really sick or has died, but they're getting better. They're getting faster and more flexible. Hopefully that'll mean less people will die.
I mean, like, yeah, they're prepared now, but at the expense, they went through trial by fire, which gets results, albeit at a pretty steep cost, as we've seen since basically nearly a year ago now, when things really started to close down the US. And then so like these are obviously just how hospitals, how medicine deals with this. This is just standard procedure. How much of this do you guys think will be brought into something commercial? So like office spaces, how much are they going to want to like make all their surfaces brass, or get rid of that big comfy leather couch?
Well, I would say I bet my money that those companies that make those hospital carpets, the first one that makes a wide expanse of finishes is going to be the one making all the money. If they can make like a nice floral rug that'll look good in a hotel lobby, but still is effective in cleaning and preventing spread, like they're going to be making a lot of money.
They would make so much money. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. People are going to look for the subtle ways. They might be willing to spend more money, like on the hospitality side or casinos. But on a casino, they have lots of money, but they want an image. So that's the big thing that casinos have been struggling with this. Is like they're willing to spend any amount of money if they could have a solution where when you walked into the casino, it didn't look like there was a pandemic anymore, right? They want you to be immersed in an experience of enjoyment and stuff, but they can't do that. You can't have people crowded around a poker table. without having there be screens and stuff between them. And so some people are going to spend a lot of money to keep the kind of experience and be safe. Most developers, I think, are going to, as quickly as they can, move back to business as usual. I don't see a lot
Probably
of grass
sad, but
here,
true.
unfortunately.
Yeah, even the client that did ask for it, I don't know. I mean, they asked us to look into it because they were in a panic, and it's like, oh my God, it's COVID, what do we do? But are they really going to do it? Probably not. I mean, that project's on hold now because of COVID. So, like,
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be I always think of like all these like the fake green stuff, and there's going to be a fake COVID protections. And so like there's going to be things that like look like brass but actually aren't. There's going to be things that like seem like they're a really great idea, and they're going to say like, oh, this is a washable, hypoallergenic, whatever, and it's like not actually going to help. And I think we're going to be going through that for a while.
There's going to be a lot of security theater, to make you feel safe, but not actually be safe. Like anytime somebody's like, oh yeah, we've got like MERV 19 filters in the air handling system. I'm like, so what? Like the person is sitting 3 feet away from you. Like if the air handler is directly in between me and the other person, maybe that would matter. But like, so that's a fact that I hear all the time. Like, oh, we have better filters.
Yeah.
Like that is nearly meaningless, but it's a fact that sounds important and it makes people feel safer. And so you're going to see a lot of stuff like that.
It's like great to tout all these like cool things that you have, but then at the end of the day, if you don't have fan here and the filter up there between you and the next person, it's like, well, you got rid of the point.
I mean, for the same cost, it would be better to switch, like Patrick was saying. I think that, or I hope that communal restrooms are on their way out and everything's moving to single-use, unisex, family kind of style restrooms distributed throughout buildings. I think they're just a lot better for people to use, more comfortable. I think that's actually going to make people safer in a pandemic than saying you put a new filter in an air handler,
Yeah, I definitely think that thinking of this as a catalyst for all these things that we've been stewing, like thinking about like, I think everything that makes a space more accessible, like ADA accessibility for people with any form of disabilities, like someone in a wheelchair, someone in a cane, all of those things are going to be helpful in a pandemic. So like thinking about how much weight you need to push against the door to open it affects how much exposure you're going to have on your hand. They having the hardware on the ground of the door, on the bottom of the door, that allows you to, with your foot, open the door without ever having to touch something with your hand, is going to be helpful. And I think those are the things, those like the little things are going to be the big impact solutions that I hope and I do think we're going to be seeing more of. And I like the things that have existed in rare cases in the last 10 years. I think those are going to be the solution that are going to make our spaces much better and are going to be really easy to institute. Like how easy is it going to be? Like it's going to be comparatively, like, are you going to change all the doors in your building to be, have slightly to be automatic, door with sensors, or are you going to put a new hardware in it so you're going to be able to, with your foot, click it open?
Yeah, $1,000 a door for an electrified door hardware. You're going to end up with a foot plate, $25.
Yeah.
But it's going to be effective. I mean, some of the best solutions in architecture, honestly, are the small ones. I mean, the profession, has been doing this for, 9,000 years or so, and we're still finding natural ventilation, sunlight, like a lot of really basic core things are important. And, there are ventilation strategies and dehumidification strategies that are completely passive, that have existed for thousands of years, that are effective at, purifying air or moving air out of a building. And we just have to use them. We have to abandon the air conditioning that we spent 70 years getting used to.
Yeah. I hope natural ventilation becomes a big thing. Like even like in the Bay Area, where like it can be like I'm talking like I live in Oakland, and like it could be 45 degrees at 8 a.m. and by noon it's saying 75, and you'd still prefer just to open your window in the afternoon and close it in the morning. And that's really the best condition, rather than sitting in an office building where you're sealed up and you have to go walk over to the thermostat and turn the temperature down when it gets hot in the afternoon.
And then people inevitably complain. It's like, oh, who turned the thermostat down? It's too cold now.
Think about what we were talking about 5 years ago, which I haven't heard a lot of people mention before, but sick building syndrome. Remember that? We were sealing up buildings so tight that CO2 and other chemicals were actually literally building up in the air, and people were getting sick because we were making buildings too tight. They weren't ventilated enough. We weren't getting bad chemicals and things out. It's the same condition with COVID. I mean, the virus is now in there, and you've given it nowhere to go. You've sealed the building so tight, there's no aerial infiltration. The only air that ever leaves is through your return air system. And I don't know, they're mildly effective.
Yeah. All right. And that's cool. I think we've had a pretty good discussion about like how COVID has impacted architecture. Do you guys have any final thoughts you want to impart?
The only thing I would say is that the concept of sort of communal living, like on a college campus, say a group of guys living together in the same space, maybe united by some sort of organization, that's out the window. No more physical locations ever again. Anyone who's got one or building one, they should sell it. They're just, that's. I'm actually super excited for when that grand opening gets to happen.
Oh, we're so heartbroken that we couldn't get to use it, because it's just so, like, you know, to tell
right there.
Yeah, okay. So to tell the viewers who are going to be watching this video, who may or may not be watching, we, Delta Pi, have recently bought a new house. Literally, what, a year and a half ago? Or we didn't buy it. It was finished. The construction of it was finished a year and a half ago. And, you know, some of our brothers started to move in, you know, Steve and Alex here among them. And, you know, when COVID hit, we were kicked off campus. Otherwise, we couldn't, you know, go to our classes. And so it's like, it's just such a nice space for us to like hang out and do stuff. And we're so heartbroken that we can't use it this semester.
The way I put it is, we got it at the most suboptimal time possible, like the worst timing. If it was any later, everything would have gotten delayed and it wouldn't be a big deal. If it was earlier, we would have got to use it. We got it at the perfect, terrible time.
It's that old Delta Phi luck.
There you go.
My goodness. Yeah,
It'll be great when this starts to pass and we all have vaccines and we can see our families again and enjoy these spaces that are just out there. Concerts, theater, restaurants. I probably won't run out to a casino, but I do miss restaurants.
Yeah.
And I miss ART in Boston.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the meantime, I think like thinking about your own surroundings in COVID, like if you're stuck in a room in that is your home office for the day, like how do you make it better for yourself? What can you do to like think about the things that you liked about your work? Like, did you have a window open at certain times of the day? Think about like, I mean, even like relocating your office to get more light, like that's a big one. Having an operable window, that's a big one. Like, I think that's one thing I think that people should be thinking more about is where they're choosing to work at home, if they get that luxury of working from home, and being comfortable in that space and making it comfortable for yourself. What chair are you using? I mean, I'm a bad example. I have an IKEA chair from grad school that's like 10 years old and falling apart and definitely not very good lumbar support.
Yeah.
I like where Christos is. It's beautiful. I mean, very. I'm in what is normally a closet. I push that aside when I have like presentations. So I'll do like town hall meetings and school building committee meetings, which are recorded. And no one seems to be able to notice that this ceiling is actually sloped. It's
Oh.
just the perfect optical illusion. It looks,
Yeah.
the fisheye lens makes it look like I'm actually in a room, but I'm in about
Yeah.
a half of a room that normally is filled with clothes. This is
Nice.
my
Yeah.
But
Oh
Emily's
God,
working at the
lovely.
couch downstairs, so like I at least
Yeah.
have a desk.
Yeah, it really surprises me. I saw an air study that was done, or a study that was done about like various different things to combat the spread of COVID, and ventilation is like much more useful than some
Right.
people might think. Like
Mhm.
that mass is easy and should be relatively obvious for most people, but like just popping open a window and letting the air flow is like, oh my goodness.
It's
Mind
almost
blown.
like it's a respiratory disease. Almost.
What?
Almost like that.
Crazy. Yeah, but bring. I think the most for me personally, because I wasn't planning on living at the house. I had a previous arrangement that I planned with other friend, a previous living arrangement, and yeah. But even I really miss the days when we could just walk into the house, because there would always be somebody there. Say like, oh, what are you up to right now? Doing some homework, but we can do something later or right now, and just like that ease of being able to meet someone so easily and so conveniently. Now that's gone. It's just like, well,
Yeah.
I'm a bit unfulfilled. I'm a bit dissatisfied.
The one thing that Zoom
Yeah.
and all this is not recapturing is sort of serendipitous interaction.
Yeah.
When you're walking through an office and you run into someone and realize you're both kind of working on the same problem from different angles, or you share a common interest that you never even knew about. That doesn't happen when you are only interacting with people on a schedule with a topic.
Yeah.
So I am excited for when the offices do start to reopen in whatever form that is someday.
Yeah. And along that, I also feel bad for the freshmen right now, because they, some of them, they're allowed to get, well, basically all of them, they're allowed to go onto campus because, RPI recognized that, these serendipitous meetings are so important to socializing people, to building new relationships. And for us, the older people, we already have our friends, so we're relatively content with staying where we are. But for us, it's like we also miss out on those serendipitous those sudden new friendships that we could have been made at just like at some lower level class that somebody forgot to take for 3 years. I didn't forget to take intro chemistry or anything. Or
Dude, I'm one credit behind. I didn't actually graduate. Is this some sort of nightmare? I've had this before.
Yeah, Eric, this is all just a prank show. Actually, you have to come back for your diploma. Yeah. But
I'd like to ask a question. And first of all, this has been fascinating, and thank you three for taking the time and doing this. Just great. I'm curious about the mental health implications and how significant they are in your work right now. Also, kind of a follow-up, the air purification systems that are being designed to really take care of things. That's wonderful. But is there a downside to that? Will people be less likely to develop immunities to things that people normally would develop an immunity to? Will a common cold become more severe because people have not been exposed to it?
Yeah, there's some potential there. I mean, the HVAC tools are pretty strong. It's not like it only kills 99.999% of bacteria. They generally are the flamethrower approach on these kinds of HVAC systems. It kills everything. which is good, but I would not say it's good to run year round for all time, right? Because I don't know what the ramifications to living and working in entirely sterile environments would be, nor do I think it's worth the energy cost to constantly be sterilizing our environments.
Yeah, I would definitely say that that's the number one danger. And like, I don't think there's any particular mechanism to stop that from happening, except for somebody's rationale be like, wait, this might be a bad idea, because if the engineer gets told we want this to be a clean room environment, they're going to design a clean room environment. If the HVAC subcontractor gets told we want this level, they're not going to say, well, are you sure you want that level? Because they're going to pocket the money they can get from selling you something that's 5 times, 10 times, 100 times better than what you need. I think that is definitely impactful. As to the mental health issue, I think I look at it like when I go into a building built in the 80s, like an office building built in the 80s, where there's like the window glazing is really like it's not very clear. The air is kind of like stale because it's been recycled so many times. I think we got to learn from our past. Like that's just it doesn't feel like a good space. It's not a space that I want to be in for very long. And I think that might be like the other side of this is like, if we build our spaces like clean rooms, people aren't going to want to be in them, and people are going to be out and going to be around or going out to bars, going out to restaurants. Like they're going to do other risky behavior. So I'm not sure that like we're going to be in a situation where we're lowering our immunity because we're not exposed to it. I think we might actually be quite the opposite. Stop using the spaces that are over designed for it, because it infringes on our lifestyle or our happiness or our mental health.
Are you saying those spaces are too sterile to be enjoyable?
Which spaces?
The like
80s office.
Yeah, it was.
I've never worked in a clean lab. Maybe you should talk to some of our alumni that are like working like at Intel and stuff that work like Canada. Kevin Canada works, and I think he works in a clean room every day. Like I can't imagine that the artificial light, the artificial air, like air processing.
I'll say personally,
like tan.
Yeah.
I don't know. The mental health is an interesting one. I mean, mental health institutions are definitely being taxed and stressed by this. People who are living in community homes, group homes, things like this, people who have care, like my grandparents and some of my family have just general care. 3 nurses who come and make rounds. Well, that's really hard. It's 3 exposure points. It's a big bubble. He's been fine, in his late 90s, and he made it through, and he's getting vaccinated, and everything's going to be great. But it, was very big concern for a while there. And I know that it's caused some mental health care to become a little bit more standoffish, a little bit more distant. They don't want to interact as much in the group homes with the people. And they don't want the people in the group homes interacting as much with each other. And when you're in a group home environment, that's kind of all there is to do. Like playing checkers alone isn't great. So, they want the social interaction, and then that's been hard. And then I think we're all a little bit like that. We've all been starving for social interaction. We've all been stressed. We're all having a little bit of PTSD. All these business meetings and the, staff. You got to make sure the staff that work on your projects and the team underneath you know that they can take the hours that they need, that family's important, to stay flexible, because there are going to be some days where people are going to have just a lot of trouble because of the pandemic. They're going to be too stressed out, or they're going to be overloaded, or daycare is going to close like it does for those of us who have kids and are trying to manage this whole thing. So the company I've worked for has thankfully been very understanding. They opened up more vacation time. They've put people on more flexible hours and things like that, let people work differential shifts and things like that. It's all trying to create an environment where we're helping each other through this. rather than anyone thinking like they have to do it on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think that one of the things I was reading is like the big divide for like seeking help, like therapy and like suicide hotlines, is that people who are already in therapy are getting actually much better care than they did before the pandemic, at least from professional help, because they're accessing like the the Zoom meetings with their therapists more often, because that's just there's a lower barrier to entry. You don't have to travel the hour round trip or 30 minutes round trip. But the people who don't access those and need them, it's kind of harder. So I think there's kind of this digital divide right now that's going to be really important, even just that affects their mental health.
But we would all agree, Roger, that you should seek some sort of professional mental health.
Oh my goodness. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you guys again for showing up to this.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's glad to hear about something something so fresh and different from our usual like academic studies.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep in contact with you guys. I'll have this posted onto. We have a YouTube channel now where we post
Nice.
various things. This will be the first sort of like professional development video series, because I forgot to record the Neil Barton one we had 2 weeks ago.
I better start humming some sort of copyrighted song.
No, don't do it. But yeah, thanks again for showing up, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Interesting.
everybody.
It was
Great.
great.
Thank you.
Have a
Good
great
seeing
night
you.
and a good weekend.
Yeah.
Have a good
everybody.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.